Hi, welcome to Armchair Philosophy. I'm Rubin and this time I'll be talking to you about Epicurus. Epicurus was a Hellenistic philosopher, meaning that he was active between the period of 323 BCE and 31 AD. Specifically, he was born in 341 BCE and died in 270 BCE at the age of about 71. During Epicurus's life, there were various popular schools of philosophy being taught in Greece. The Epicureans, however, who attended his school, would be taught his philosophy and mostly his ethics, which were an offshoot of hedonism. Hedonism is the school of thought in ethics which states that happiness is the most important thing in life, and at both times that happiness is the goal of life and the most important asset that a human being can have. By most accounts, hedonism was started by the philosopher Aristippus, though his account of hedonism and Epicurus's account of hedonism aren't exactly alike. Most hedonistic philosophies, however, seem to be fundamentally rooted in utilitarianism, in that they equate utility with happiness or pleasure, and focus on the maximization of that utility, which is happiness. Though Epicurus did have his own school, a place called the Garden, which he named because it was designed after his own personal garden in his backyard, not many of his writings still exist today. There are a few letters in Lives of Eminent Philosophers, and there are also a few collections of quotes, one in the Vatican called the Vatican Sayings, and the other called the Principal Doctrines. Anything else is just fragmented, though it is said that Epicurus wrote over 40 books, some of which were multiple volumes long. In Christianity, Epicureans make a few small appearances. They speak with the Apostle Paul in Acts 17:18, and in Dante's Inferno, they're condemned to hell due to their materialistic nature. Dante's conception comes from Epicurus's metaphysics. You see, Epicurus was an atomist, which to him meant that the fundamental building blocks of nature were little tiny indivisible pieces of matter which were just floating around in space. Everything which happens to Epicurus is just an interaction on the atomic level. But he does admit that the atoms can't always fly straight. Sometimes they have to swerve and get out of the way of each other, or else we're left with all the problems of hard determinism. To be clear, Epicurus supported the idea of free will. While atomism was an important step for natural philosophy, and eventually its child, the natural sciences, most Greek atomists probably wouldn't know what you're talking about if you were to say anything about quantum physics or even basic atomic physics. But Epicurus is usually remembered for two other things, his hedonism and the problem of evil. The problem of evil, which I'll go over in depth some other time, can be fundamentally broken down into this process. For God to be God, he must be all-powerful, all-loving, and all-knowing, but the state of the world doesn't allow for a conscious being who is all-powerful because, well, evil does exist. So whatever God is, if it or they do exist, either isn't conscious or isn't what we would call God at all. But nothing beyond Lactantius's claim that Epicurus actually made the argument points towards him having said it at all. In fact, there's no reference to it in any of the extant writings. Now, let's return to his ethics. His hedonism was different than that of his contemporaries, in that he defined pleasure as the absence of pain. Like a scale, the more pleasure you have, the less pain you can have, and the more pain you have, the less pleasure you can have. One might be tempted to ask about masochistic individuals, but as far as we know, Epicurus never made a statement on it, and if he did, it doesn't exist anymore. Interestingly enough, Epicurus was one of the earliest philosophers to advocate for the non-aggression principle. The non-aggression principle, or NAP, is the fundamental ethic behind the Libertarian Party in the modern United States of America. It's fundamentally self-explanatory. All that needs to be done to have a just society is to have everyone agree by means of a social contract not to harm one another. Beyond that, laws which make happiness maximal are good, and any other laws are just garbage and should be gotten rid of. Here's a popular quote from the Principal Doctrines of Epicurus. "It is impossible to live a pleasant life without living wisely and well and justly, and it is impossible to live wisely and well and justly without living pleasantly." With Epicurus's conception of justice being identical with the non-aggression principle, this pushes forward the idea that Epicureanism was more utilitarian than not. But unlike other contemporary hedonists, Epicurus didn't support overindulgence. You can maximize pleasure and minimize pain, but you don't want to overfeed yourself. In fact, Epicurus stated that you should eat only bread and drink only water, because water would sustain your thirst, and bread would satisfy your hunger, and then you'd be automatically free from any pain, and you would be happy. Overindulging in food, for example, could cause you to have a stomachache, and then you would be in pain, and ergo, not maximally happy. To Epicurus, death wasn't even necessarily a bad thing. You see, Epicurus supported pleasure as the absence of pain, and in the state of death, you are experiencing no pain. Therefore, you are maximally happy. This caused his followers to adopt a particular epitaph which is sometimes still seen on gravestones today. It reads, "I was not, I was, I am not, I do not care." However, if the state of death is maximal pleasure, then following the non-aggression principle may be erroneous. After all, if I were to kill you, I may have put you into a state of maximal pleasure. That is, of course, a simple issue to point out, and it's possible that in one of Epicurus's 40-some books he answered it, but the world may never know. That's all for this time on Armchair Philosophy. I hope you learned something. I hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. If you really want to follow us and support us, then follow us on our social media and donate to us on Patreon, or you could even buy a t-shirt. Also, if you want to talk to us, there are forums up on our website, MilwaukeeAtheists.com. That's all for now. See you later.